Howdy freeze dryers, welcome back to the freeze drying community. Today we're doing something new, something unique, and a new take on something that we have done in the past. And it's really the perfect time of the year to do this. Hopefully this video reaches you as your garlic and maybe even your onions are ready to be picked from your garden. This is such a cool way to process your garlic and your onions. Usually if you're like me, you have an abundance of both and you kind of start looking for things to use it in. But not to worry, if you are not a gardener, you can still do this with store-bought garlic or minced garlic from the store. Today we are going to make our own freeze-dried garlic salt and also onion salt. And you're gonna wonder why you've never done it before. Super simple recipe today without very many ingredients. You just need some cloves of garlic, if you have some fresh or buy them from the store, peel them and get them down to the cloves. Or you can also use minced garlic from the store. If you're making onion salt, you obviously need lots of onions. And then last, but certainly not least, a whole bunch of salt. The trickiest part of this whole process is knowing the ratio. You obviously want it to be very salty because it is a salt, but you need to know how much garlic or how much onion to add into that salt. And we're gonna start with our onion salt first. A couple things worth mentioning before we move forward. You wanna be very strategic on your freeze drying onions and garlic. Why? Because they are extremely potent and they will stink up your whole freeze dryer. So I would either be strategic on what you put in if you're doing other things, if you're freeze drying other things at the same time as the onion or garlic, or maybe go into, like I like to do rice or something like that, or something that that flavor will add to in my next batch of freeze drying. So if you do rice, or if you do a stew or something like that in your next batch after the onions and garlic, then ideally it will add that flavor to your next freeze dryer load, and also ideally kind of absorb some of that flavor and that stink out of the freeze dryer. If not, you need to probably clean your freeze dryer pretty well after doing this. Another thing to mention is on the onions, you can actually, you probably want to take the ends off of them, but you can actually use the skins on them as well. Those skins will actually break down into a powder as well. Last thing, you can also leave them in either whole if you have a good enough blender or food processor, or large chunks. You don't need to really process them down into very small chunks because these are going to get all diced up anyway. So the ratio of salt to onion or garlic is very important. I'm going to give you the baseline, and then you can adjust it just depending on how oniony or how garlicky you want your onion or garlic salt. I would start with half a cup of onion. I'm going a little bit stronger with mine because that's how we like it. So half a cup of onion to 1 cup of salt. And before I put the salt in, I'm actually going to blend up these onions, and as with any freeze drying recipe, you want to use as minimal water as possible, just because that makes the process take longer, obviously. I didn't put any water in this. It's even thinner than a paste, which is great. You can add other flavors to this if you wanted to. You could add herbs and spices to this. You can also do this same type of thing with all kinds of different things. You could make a tomato salt. You can make citrus salts for drinks or beverages. Be great if you're playing bartender for the weekend. You could also do celery salt, or really just any kind of generic seasoning salt for all kinds of different things. And because I am a freeze drying nerd, I'm gonna put dividers in here because I wanna see if I can make a salt block. Let's move on to our garlic salt. Garlic salt is the same concept. We're just gonna use a little bit less garlic. I'm gonna start off with 1/4 cup of cloved garlic. You can use minced garlic also. You'd want to do 1/4 cup of that, along with 1 cup of salt. And then for the garlic, it's probably not going to juice down as nice as the onion, so you may want to add a little bit of water to your blender or food processor. I got a little heavy on the water for the garlic. It's a little bit harder to get out of this blender, so I added some more water. But if you do the same thing, it's really not that big a deal. It's just gonna take your cycle just a little bit longer. And I did 2 rounds of garlic salt. I added a little bit of Italian seasoning to there. Now these are ready for the pre-freeze. I like to pre-freeze all liquids. All right, well, we have a super interesting freeze drying recipe today. And if you're interested in interesting freeze drying recipes, make sure you check out the freeze drying cookbook. You can do the freeze drying cookbook website, which is over 400 recipes with new recipes added every week, and they are added real time as we bring these videos out. Or you can check out our compilation freeze drying cookbook, which is a big old cookbook that we put together since 2017. We've been compiling this. Since then, we've put over 300 of our favorite freeze drying recipes. These are all tried and true freeze drying recipes. I think there's a little something for everyone in here. And make sure you check out freeze drying supplies. If you see any of the supplies that we've used in this video and other videos, that is where they came from, freezedryingsupplies.com. And at the end of this cycle, we'll have a new freeze drying recipe. See you in a second. All right, these should be extremely dry. These took about 34 hours, and then I added about 10 hours of extra dry time. I really wanted to make sure that everything was fully dry. We used Harvest Right freeze dryers today. If you are interested in Harvest Right freeze dryers, make sure you follow our link in the description. It greatly helps out our little YouTube channel and helps us bring all of these great freeze drying videos to you. So I've been freeze drying since 2017, and after probably thousands of loads at this point, and really freeze drying just about anything you can think of, I still can be shocked by certain things. This garlic is really interesting. This is our onion salt, this is our garlic salt. I put the dividers in the onion salt because I wanted to make a salt block. I did not put them in the garlic. And you'll notice that you can see the air bubbles in this. And you can also see where it definitely expanded and went over the edge just a tiny bit with the garlic. It did not do that with the onion salt. I'd be curious to see if I do this again, if you can put dividers in and that will help it from doing that, or if it's just maybe a garlic related thing. But if anyone tries the garlic salt with dividers and you have the same result as with the onion salt where it does not expand, please let me know. That's valuable information for the whole freeze drying community. What we need to do now is actually take this chunkiness and turn it into a garlic salt powder, which is going to require a food processor or a blender. And before we do that, I want to see if we actually were able to make a salt block. So the dividers definitely cut through, but the key will be to getting these out in one block piece. There it is. Ta-da! All right, and for my next trick, I'm going to try and get all of this garlic powder into a food processor without making a gigantic mess. Our parchment paper from Freeze Drying Supplies definitely saved us. This would stick to the bottom of the tray, no question, but it makes it come out in nice chunks this way with the parchment paper down. I'm just going to do probably a little bit at a time. I have a feeling this is probably going to powder down quite a bit. You can process it down into more of a salt texture, or you can probably process this down into a powder is my guess. We're going to find out here in a second. Check that out. Highly concentrated, finely powdered, homemade freeze-dried garlic salt. That was great results. I was a little nervous there when we saw all the air bubbles and chunkiness when we first took it out of the freeze dryer, but this is great. This is a great consistency. This definitely puts off a garlic cloud after you process it, but what great results. Super happy with this. Let's try our onion salt next. Not gonna lie, the dividers from Freeze Drying Supplies for the win on this, because the mess is much more minimal when you can just break these off into chunks like this. Awesome results. Just about the same results with the onion salt. You end up more like a powder than granules like you're used to. I'll say a couple things before we sign off today. A little dab will do you on this. It's very, very potent, which it should be. It's salt. It is very salty. You can adjust these measurements and ratios to your liking, just depending on what your plan is with it in the future. Make sure you stay tuned in the next coming weeks, because we're going to be using this garlic and onion salt in some future video recipes. And this recipe from today will last you a very, very long time. That's just one tray's worth in there, so imagine if you did an entire freeze dryer load. It should last you several years. In the meantime, thank you for being part of the freeze drying community. Happy freeze drying, and we will see you soon. Hey, you! Are you unlocking your full potential as a freeze dryer? If you're not signed up for the freeze drying community email list, you're missing out on pro freeze drying tips and freeze dryer giveaways, the latest sales, inspirational people in the freeze drying community, as well as invaluable food storage recipes. And most important, unlocking your inner freeze drying guru. Click the first link in the description to get signed up.